Gotcha. What's up, horror movie fans? It is Danny and Pete from the Lassercast, and we are once again joined by our great friend of the channel and a man who has kept us occupied for over a day of consecutive hours with awesome horror documentary from the 80s and now the 90s. David Weiner, In Search of Darkness, 1995 to 1999, is in its pre-order stages, and we're glad to have you back on the Lassercast.
Thanks a lot, guys. I'm happy to be there. When you said 24 hours, I was thinking more like I've spent so much time hanging out with you guys online that it probably is collectively 24 hours easily. And I guess I made a movie, by the time this one comes out, that it's a 24-hour documentary shot into your veins.
I mean, we've done 3 documentaries on the 80s. We had you on for In Search of Tomorrow, and we also had you on for 1990 to 94. So we may have spoken for close to a day at this point.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I'm going to throw out that I have construction going across the street, so if you hear the occasional beeping, then that's out of my control, and it's not like an old lady trying to park for like an hour. So
no worries. So I wanted to start off because for Pete and I and horror fans of our vintage, this upcoming documentary is the sweetest of sweet spots, because 1995 to 1999 is basically, we are through puberty and we are going to high school. We are able to go to the movie theater on our own now without our moms and dads. And in both of our cases, Pete and I, we worked at movie theaters during this time period. So like we were just talking before you got on, rewatching the trailer, and this is like, saw that in the theater, saw that in the theater, saw that in the theater, rented that in the video store, heard about that from a friend, like, snuck people in to see that movie, made out with a girl during this movie. And my first question, and we kind of talked about this when we had you on from 90 to 94, the 90s as a whole, but I really think this second part of the 90s is kind of maligned by fans of the genre. I think there's an instinctive thing that when people say horror movies of the 80s, people go, yeah, horror movies of the 70s, oh, the best ones. And then you say horror movies of the 90s and they go, eh. So now that you've spent copious amounts of, like, we're going to spend 4 to 5 hours watching this. You must have spent, weeks and weeks and weeks going through all this footage. What do you think gave fans that initial meh reaction? And then what do you hope fans kind of get out of this to maybe change their perception of the decade, especially this later half of it?
I think that's a great question. I have a multifaceted. I can't, caffeine, 1, 2, 3, here we go. It's in the veins. And I have a multifaceted sort of answer to that, because I've really been thinking about that, because I think a lot of it has to do with not the quality and the content of the material that came out during that decade, but I think it's a memory hole of misalignment with when we think about this decade. I think it's been overshadowed by how amazing and overflowing and copious amounts of horror movies there were in the 80s. That's one element. So we're going to break down a number of elements. So get your Venn diagrams and your bullet points. But the thing is, I think if you look at the way we look back at decades with nostalgia, and usually about every 25 years, give or take, 25 to 30 years, a decade comes back into the pop culture with full force. Whether it's the 50s, whether it's the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s. Like when I was a kid in the 70s, everything was about the 50s, whether it was the monster movies, being remade, or it was Sha Na Na and Happy Days on TV, or George Lucas making American Graffiti, which actually takes place in the early 60s, but it's got a whole 50s vibe. I grew up in the 70s as a kid thinking that the 50s was the greatest time in the world because that's what pop culture media was telling me. I wanted to be as cool as the Fonz. Cut to the 80s. I feel like the 80s, because the Gen Xers love that era so much and do not want to leave it and never did want to leave it. I think it's overstayed its welcome, arguably, or it is just, factually stuck around as the nostalgia for previous decades can happen, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in commercials that we see. The 80s came back and never quite, it got such a lock and a foothold, never quite left. So cut to the 90s. And I know this is like a TED talk now about to answer your question, but I cut to the 90s, and I kind of feel like people, they don't value that decade as much because the 80s, this golden age of horror, declared that it is essentially the best. A lot of people truly believe that. I'm not going to say one way or another. I love it. You love it. We all love it. But do we have to pick favorites among all of our children? But because it was such a huge decade, I think people sort of think about the 90s and they think, well, what was there? There was bad CG, and there was Scream, maybe Blair Witch. Gosh, I can't remember what happened in the first half. So they essentially just discount an entire decade in the memory hole where they just can't remember anything that was good about it. So what the cool challenge is for my documentaries that I'm doing of the 90s, which now it's part 1 and part 2, it's actually really great that we were able to put, you hear that? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's good.
They decided to all day long. I'm sorry, I'm mid-sentence, but all day long they've decided they were quiet. And now it's like they're going to just pound outside. It's crazy. So ultimately, what's great about, and I know we're just running and you're not going to edit this, so sorry everybody that I'm a little disappointed.
No, it's fine.
It's just distracting out there. So anyway, the reason the fact that I was able to do part 1 and part 2 of the 90s is actually a really good thing. And it wasn't initially this intention, but the thing is, not when you think of the 90s, especially if you're in memory hole land as a casual horror fan, not a hardcore horror fan who knows all the cool stuff that was going on, is I have an opportunity to kind of take Scream out of the spotlight for the first half and kind of create a runway of where horror was going, how it was trying to find its identity, and all the virtues that were there that we just seem to have completely forgotten, as well as packed in a lot of the thrillers, quote unquote, that are really horror, depending on how you look at it, and saying, if you include all those, Silence of the Lambs, for example, which would you call that anything else but a horror movie? We already talked about that, but that, movies like that and serial killer films and movies like California with, Brad Pitt and David Duchovny, that to me is not a thriller. That's a freaking horror movie about serial killer and people doing a story about serial killers. So the idea is that I was able to really build an on-ramp to the part that everybody remembers and everybody loves. And while I do part 2, 90 to 95 to 99, I also get to say, yeah, that was this, but because it was in the zeitgeist, because it was doing so well in pop culture with teen-driven, meta-fueled, post-Scream / Kevin Williamson content, there was a huge amount of stuff where the pendulum swung in terms of what people were seeking out. Not everybody wanted that. Not even everybody called that necessarily horror. If you have like disturbing behavior, is that horror? The Faculty, is it horror? I say yes, and yes. But I think the masses going to these things wanted to see the Dawson's Creek kids in jeopardy, or Monica from Friends in jeopardy, and said, this is safe for me. We could go, and everyone's talking about it. This is not a real horror movie. I could see urban legend and not be afraid. It'll just be fun, But on the flip side, you've got the emergence of J-horror. You've got a lot of harder stuff, a lot of straight-to-video stuff, and a lot of mid-range stuff that's indie filmmaking that was inventive, clever, and not in the glaring spotlight and influence of Scream. That was a very long answer, but I
No,
got interrupted by construction.
It's all right, man. Why don't you tee up another very long answer? Because this is not a TED talk, but it's a David discussion. Maybe it's a Weiner wag, one of those, right? But here's the thing. This is what we're going to do. My question is, throughout the trailer, you see at one point you see Skeet Ulrich say, "We all go a little mad sometimes." Then you see Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. I love that editing. Great choice there. And I was thinking, I was like, oh, that's Psycho. I almost got like a little excited for that version of Psycho. I'm like, hey, I know that movie. And it reminds me of people that are into the prequels now, where they look back on the Star Wars prequels. We all reviled them. They came out in the very late 90s. And now they're looked at with such fondness and such nostalgia. I was wondering, with the talking heads that you have for this version, this installment, do they have that same kind of attitude? Like, do you notice in the overall discussion, do the talking heads have this nostalgia for the late 90s the way that they did for the 80s, or is there a difference there?
I think a lot of the talking heads who were there and now talking about their projects, they like we do, we kind of lose 10 years when we look back, and we think the 90s were probably about 20 years ago. When you do your math and you're like, oh boy, I just completely forgot. Talk about memory hole. We're all older and grayer, and it was longer ago. So I think a lot of the people who are sitting down to talk about this are very happy to do it. But I kind of remind them that it was 30 or 30 plus years ago, and they kind of rankle about it. They're like, oh, really? You're gonna, oh man, don't remind me. It's like, we all want to sort of, give one decade a pass, so it's not as long ago. I want to take a quick moment and throw kudos to Alex Townley, my editor for the new 90s In Search of Darkness documentaries, who's working on, part 2, and he put this trailer together. And all the graphics were done by a guy named Chris Stratton, who does our graphics, and we worked really hard on this. Of course, this was spearheaded by Robin Block. It's got to feel right, and you watch this, and it's like we don't like to shy away from short and sweet. We do shy away from that. We do the opposite. This is like 5-minute trailer, so I'm glad you guys made it to the end. But there's so much to pack in, and there's so much fun stuff. And I'm glad it's just like an absolute injection of adrenaline for you guys. Because this is real fun memories. I mean, I think a larger portion of the audience this time around were either kids or teens or older growing up, watching these movies in the 90s. And so whatever you may think of these movies, they really mean so much more to us. And it comes back to the thing that I've learned making all of these In Search of documentaries, is that these movies are not necessarily about the movies themselves as much as they are what they mean to us because of who we were and where we were and who we were with at the times that we watched these. So we look back and we just think about as much as the experience and what we were either escaping or what a treat it was, or we were kind of like, sneaking it when we shouldn't. All these things make for great tales and happy memories when we look back. And even you go to like the Blair Witch Project. My experience watching the Blair Witch Project was like, here's this movie that everyone was crowing about from Sundance that apparently is this found footage of these 3 hikers who were lost, and these other filmmakers got a hold of the footage, put it together, and this is a freaking real life documentary about people seeking out some Blair Witch thing, and they never came back, and no one ever found them. Holy crap, I've got the tape. We all got to watch it. And we popped it in with a whole group of us wanting to like see what this was all about, regretting that maybe some of us didn't take Dramamine ahead of time. But it was like an amazing experience because we're like, holy crap, this is the tape everyone's talking about. And this is before it came out. And I have to just say that's as potent a memory about that movie, just for me, of this sort of super secret handshake that we had, that we all got the privilege of seeing this movie before it came out. Then it became a phenomenon. And then I get to talk to the co-director, Eduardo Sanchez, about the Blair Witch for our new documentary. I'm only going to reveal a couple talent names that have already been revealed. I'm not, maybe one more. If you,
Yeah.
if you
Sure.
But well, but first of all, you bring up Blair Witch. You can't talk about this documentary, this time period, without mentioning Blair Witch. Blair Witch to me is the most of its time movie ever made. I totally understand anybody who watches it now and is like, that's the most boring movie I've ever seen. And I'm like, well, you didn't see it in the movie theater when everyone there thought it was real, because the internet
Yep.
wasn't that big of a thing yet. And like I totally understand people who look at it through a modern lens and don't get it. But man, seeing that in the movie theater, like, whew.
You make an extremely important point. Is a lot of the nostalgia stems from the fact that we were there.
Yeah.
You know, these are very good, great movies, or very good conversations to have about very influential films. But so many people, I mean, it happens today, contemporary times. You know, you finally get around to that one movie that everyone raves about, and you're just like, well, yeah, it was okay, but you know, rarely can these things ever live up to the hype. But back
100%.
then, there were so many of these things that were such a huge deal that you know, Blair Witch, it became so much bigger than what the filmmakers ever intended it to be. You know, and you can never plan that.
No. So it's interesting because my next question is about things that you can plan, and that is sequels and franchises. 90 to 94, you have a very not good Freddy movie. You have a very not well received Jason movie. You have a very not well received Texas Chainsaw movie. You have a couple of Chucky sequels, one better than the other. And then the second half of the 90s, there's no Freddy, there's no Jason. Michael effectively gets rebooted with Halloween H2O. Chucky effectively gets rebooted with Bride of Chucky. And then you have this new crop of slasher franchise people, you know, slasher killers who start their own new franchises. Of course, you mentioned Scream earlier, another movie you cannot possibly talk about 90s horror without talking about. So my question for you is, how does the new crop of horror slashers in the documentary trailer, we see, of course, Ghostface, we see I Know What You Did Last Summer, we see Wishmaster. Those are just three that come to mind. How do you think they compare to the Michael came out in 78, but really the 80s boom slasher characters?
Well, also, I want to make sure that we do mention, and I know you guys know, that after Freddy died, you know, no spoiler there, it's in the title, Freddy's dead, it's on the poster, on this day that opens, he dies. There, just a couple years later, there's New Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And I think that's an important movie and rebirth, so to speak, to connect to these movies, in that essentially not from that movie alone, but from Wes Craven's influence, the meta-fueled films really took off. You know, Bride of Chucky is an incredibly meta movie. I mean, there's a great, we included in the trailer, you know, he makes John, I'm not going to say the name. I'm about to say the name, but one of the characters dies by way of, nails. And, Chucky looks over as he's got nails sticking all out of his head. He's like, why does that look so familiar? There's lots of meta stuff there. Even when Michael Myers came back, that was a Kevin Williamson treatment. He didn't have enough time. He was busy on doing so many things, but he wrote this like mega huge, many page treatment where they just said, you know what, this is our script, make a script out of this, but it's going to be the Kevin Williamson take on it. So there's meta riffing left and right, you know. And of course, Scream is all about meta. And I know what you did last summer. Do any of us know what the Hook guy's name is? Probably not. It's kind of you in the back of the class. What's his name?
I think his last name is Benson because
it's Gordon's fisherman.
Is he the fisherman? Like, is that what they call him? Sorry.
I only remember that because one of the worst lines in movie history is in the sequel where the killer reveal is, he goes, my name is Benson. I'm Ben's son. So I think the fisherman's name was Ben something.
Yeah, that's good. That's good that you recall that. I don't even, my point is, I don't think anybody remembers. Unless they're like unless
you worked at a movie theater and you have a stupid memory for this stuff, yeah.
But I think a lot of the whatever was going on in the second half. I mean, Phantasm 4 comes out. The Tall Man's back. Texas Chainsaw is back with the Next Generation. Kim Henkel, who wrote the first the original classic that Tobe Hooper directed, he comes back to do this film and direct it, and it's got its own story because it was very different than what anyone expected. And of course, we have you've got Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger right on the cusp of before they were household names, who were like, yeah, we don't want this movie to come out. It's going to tarnish our new Hollywood credibility. I just think the second half there was definitely some merit to these sequels that were sort of going on and on and on. Some were strong, some were not. Most were meta-fueled, and that was really sort of the name of the game in the second half of the 90s. But there were still plenty of other things. I mean, like straight to video, Full Moon, the Subspecies sequels keep on going. The Puppet Master sequels keep on going. Carnosaur keeps on going. You name it. The indies were just like, well, if we got something that people like, let's keep on going if we can, with the franchise. So The Dentist, you got The Dentist 1 and 2,
right,
Corbin Burnson, who is in our cast for In Search of Darkness 95 to 99, talking all about that. He's also in Tales from the Hood by Rusty Cundiff, an amazing film that also we should focus on because that's a movie that sadly, it's a great movie, and it reflects an era of time just a couple of years before it and the Black experience. But sadly, 30 years on, it's
very topical,
more relevant than ever. That's all I'll say. I don't think I need to pontificate about that. So, there's a lot of cool stuff that was going on. But in terms of the sequels that you're asking about, I think so. Michael Myers also, boy, you got Halloween 6, which next to Halloween Resurrection, I think is probably kind of lower on the totem pole for most people. But you got Paul Rudd, and you do have the final
Donald Pleasance.
Donald Pleasance, exactly, performance phoned in. I mean, he was now. Sorry, Donald. Listen, he was on his last legs, literally, but he's in the movie, so that's cool. I don't know. There's some interesting stories around all of these movies, and I'm not here to be cynical about it. I mean, that's what we're all about. Everything is on an even playing field in the In Search of Darkness movies, and we let the people who made these movies tell their story and share their perspective. And if we can't get them themselves, we do get experts to talk about it. But I know I'm again doing all the talking, but going back to Psycho. Psycho, that's like an inflection point of what happened here. And a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction to that, it shouldn't have happened. But I think that makes for an interesting discussion because there are ways to look at the Psycho shot-by-shot remake by Gus Van Sant, starring Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates, that I think you could include it in this sort of meta era as a commentary on filmmaking. I just think it was arguably, and I'm not saying whatever you want to feel about that, but I think if you just look at it as a case study of what, should it have been made? Yes or no? It doesn't matter. It got made. We all watched it, and now we all have opinions about it. So I think you can't ignore that as part of this era, as whether it was a triumph, whether it was a mistake, whether it was a cautionary tale, or whether it was way ahead of its time for a variety of meta-fueled commentary on films and horror and contemporary versus old, using the same script and music. Lots to unpack there, and I think at the very least, it's an interesting thing where if people haven't heard of this or seen it, they should watch it, maybe side by side in film school, watch the the original and watch then the remake, or watch the remake and then go back to the original and see, because there are differences. It's not literally a moment by moment, shot by shot. It feels like it, but there are nuances and differences that are maybe head scratchers that are great for discussion.
Yeah. Pete, are you there? What happened?
It's funny because Danny and I have a set of questions.
We're
Am I here?
Good. I was going to say,
no, I'm not here.
Talking about Psycho glitched you out.
No. I did. We're good.
Yes. Well, what I was going to say is that, like, Danny and I have a set of questions that we ask, and we prepare them before the interview. And I'm like, how the hell do I segue to this next question from what? But watch this. I'm going to do a little magic. You ready? So you said that Corbin Bernsen is one of the talking heads. Corbin Bernsen is in an episode of Seinfeld that George Wendt is also in. George Wendt just passed away. We have a couple of people that you've mentioned passing away. Well, that you've mentioned that have passed away. Like Anne Heche was in that Psycho, and she's passed away since then. But then what I was wondering about, since we talk about David Lynch so much on our channel, and we love David Lynch, I saw Lost Highway in that trailer. And I was wondering, had David Lynch passed away when you had begun editing? I'm assuming you were already in the midst of making this before he had passed away.
We're still in.
Can you tell me about wanting to? So, like, were you like? I just kind of want to know the mindset about including Lost Highway. No, it's okay. So, like, oh Jesus Christ, I'm still here.
No, we're with you.
What about Lost Highway though? Like, what made you?
Sorry, we're talking over each other because of the delay. But I get your question in that, like, Lost Highway, is that something that's considered to be in this documentary of value, but also relative to the fact that David Lynch has passed away. We're currently in production on this. We're still shooting interviews. I'm editing this. What we're doing now is we're doing a pre-order, but the film comes out at the end of the year, unless there's some massive hiccup. But that's the plan and that's the intention. But if you look at the first In Search of Darkness 90s, I just call them part 1 and part 2. So part 1, 90 to 94. I very much made sure that I included Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me and discussion of Twin Peaks, just because that is horror adjacent or horror incarnate, depending on how you look at it. And so David Lynch, he's always peeling the onion and just flicking at the little skin tag, and then you find much more under the surface of the dermis of small town America with the way he looks at things. And I think Lost Highway absolutely deserves attention in this half of the decade, especially when if you do a little digging, you'll find that David Lynch was quite taken and quite obsessed to a certain degree by the O.J. Simpson trial, and by how a extremely well-known celebrity could despite the verdict that we all remember, or you should look it up if you don't, because despite the verdict, there's sort of a collective audience perception or public perception that he was guilty. And at that time when it was much fresher, he was very obsessed with the concept of a schism, that someone that conditioned in being a normal human being and a charismatic human being and living your daily life could do something so heinous to your former wife or to anyone for that matter, and then just sort of disconnect and disassociate with that. If you look at Lost Highway, it's not hard to describe. It's not easy to describe, and it's very hard to follow. But essentially, without spoiling too much about Lost Highway, that's kind of what goes on with Bill Pullman's character. And then the great irony of that is that Robert Blake is the guy who's in there, and Robert Blake would go on to be accused of murdering his ex-wife Bonnie Blakely. Now, of course, this is when I was at Entertainment Tonight that I had to write 5,000 Robert Blake tales. But I guess that answers your question. I think it's a great intersection between the pop culture and real, just the reality zeitgeist and cinema and the influence of that. And it's literally sits right in the middle. If you think about that timeline, there's OJ, there's Lost Highway, and then there's Robert Blake's murder. And somewhere in between, David Lynch is pulling the strings and seeing the future and drawing from the past. Who knows?
Probably. I mean, given Twin Peaks, probably.
Are you expecting that answer? I don't know.
At the same time in the late 90s that I was getting a job at the movie theater and I was going to the mall all the time and I was buying movies on VHS and this new thing called DVD. I was also, through my dad, a member of something called Columbia House 12 CDs for a penny. And watching the trailer again, and I highly recommend everybody to watch all 5 minutes of the trailer. The nostalgia that hit me was how many of those movies I owned the soundtrack for. And as a teenager who was really into hard rock and heavy metal, so many of those movies had kick-ass soundtracks. Demon Knight, Bride of Chucky, the Scream sequels. I know Scream 3 came out in 2000, but it's close enough.
Right.
So I know that one of your talking heads who has been on multiple In Search of Darkness documentaries is Corey Taylor.
Right.
So do you have any discussions, or is there a chapter on the soundtracks of these late 90s horror movies?
You always ask what is in the documentary at a certain point, and I must politely rebuff and chastise. I think it's very important to talk about that stuff. It was absolutely a huge thing. It was, if anything, movie soundtracks sort of went by the wayside, and all these amazing, soundtracks like you're talking about. And I'll add The Craft. I'll add Idle Hands. A lot of that stuff really sort of stems. I mean, the '90s in no way originated having a pop soundtrack instead of a score, at least in terms of how they released it. But I would argue that Quentin Tarantino had a lot to do with it. Between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, I think it really ramped up that studios wanted to pair up and coming bands and well known stuff with, and it goes back to Ghostbusters too. But I mean, I would say it kind of swung again and did that with, especially with the Tarantino movies, and so I think studios really wanted to sort of capitalize on that cha-ching opportunity as well. But what was the result of that? We all got insane, amazing scores. One of the guys I get to talk to that I'll also talk about and reveal is that I sat down with Marco Beltrami, who is the composer for all the Scream movies. He's done a lot of other stuff. You just got to look it up. But poor Marco Beltrami, when this was absolutely new and he gets this opportunity to do Scream before even Scream was a big thing, but he got to do, the new Wes Craven soundtrack. Here, the movie comes out and it's like hit after hit after hit after hit. Oh yeah, we'll throw in one score track there, and it wasn't until Scream 2 came out that they released the original Scream 1 soundtrack, and then they did 2 different versions where for Scream 2 they did the greatest hits version, and then they did his score as well. But I was a guy during that time who was always I sometimes found it harder and harder to find the music, the score, the symphonic soundtrack or electronic soundtrack versus this hit parade of awesome, cool bands, mostly grunge, mostly heavy metal. And I'd have to seek out the Varese. I don't know how to pronounce it, but we all know it. Varese Sarah Band, that red CD. All right, you guys are looking at me blankly.
No. I remember that.
Varese.
That's just my default.
Yeah, but those were where I was just like, I need to find the soundtrack that was actually the composer's music. I gotta search the darker corners to find these soundtracks that I wanted to listen to on my CD Walkman over and over and over. Or if I was working out, I put it in my 5 CD changer and I'd program all the tracks that I wanted. It took a lot of time, but it was very satisfying. And that was a very important part of the era. And I want to make sure that we address it.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think that Creed produced the soundtrack for Scream 3, but that's, not the 90s right there. It's kind of crazy. There's a lot of Godsmack and, Filter and stuff like that in 90s movies. Danny mentioned soundtracks. He's like, is that a segment on the documentary? And so one of the things I was going to ask was, is there a segment on horror superheroes? Because I have another podcast, it's called Comic Books Transformed. We talk about comic book adaptations. You got Blade, you got Spawn in this trailer. You don't have to tell us if there's a segment because it sounds like you don't want to. But
I was going to say, did you freeze when I chastised Danny? Because I'll chastise you as well, in a friendly way.
Let's do it.
Blade,
yes.
Blade, Spawn, you name it. If there was a horror superhero, I think it's interesting to talk about that and include it in some way, shape, or form. All I'm going to say, because I don't want to either set up or shoot down any of these amazing requests or asks or things you want to see. I'm finding, because this is such a densely packed section of years, an era of only 5 years, I come up with the same problem I have every single time I make an In Search of Darkness documentary. And that's, you think for a 5 or 6 hour long documentary, you just have loads of time to talk about all of these things. But when you do the math and you cherry pick and curate anywhere between 12, 15 movies, trying to put more in each year, then you still have a limited amount of chapters in between. So I have to be very selective, because I know we put out a survey and people respond and say, I'd love to see this for a chapter. I'd love to see that for a chapter. And all of a sudden there's more great ideas than there are spaces for these chapters. I can make smaller chapters, but then things get left out. So anyway, listen, here I am complaining to you that there's not enough time in a 6 hour documentary, but that's kind of what I come up against in terms of so many amazing subgenres. I'll offer up another subgenre, 2 of them that I think are really cool during that time. So you got the action the action superheroes, but there's also just sort of action horror as well. Like you've got End of Days, you've got From Dusk Till Dawn, you've got, Deep Blue Sea, Bats, there's all these movies where, The Mummy, Deep Rising, where it was like these were action movies with horror elements. There's just so much going on,
right.
And then these were like action-packed relentless in their pacing. End of Days, I did a semi-recent rewatch after not seeing it since 1999, and I was so entertained because there's explosions left and right. There's gunfire that's just like, it's been too long since we've had a shootout. Let's have another one. All in chasing after Satan. So it's like really good. But there's another subgenre genre. I kind of semi brought it up with bats, with Deep Blue Sea, with Anaconda. You've got sort of man versus nature, whether it's, genetically modified bats or just, Lake Placid, the world's largest creature that just is, makes a meal out of our extremely famous cast. That was a subgenre that was sort of, that had a resurgence as well. And so there, if you could just break down the various subgenres that fought for dominance would scream, the J horror, kind of sort of trying to make its way out. And a lot of other international movies that tried to sort of make their way in. Or if you look at just, I'll call it a subgenre in itself, Seven, and everything that it influenced, from End of Days to Mimic, to everyone wanting to, if not a serial killer movie, they wanted that look, they wanted that feel, in their movie where everything is dark, everything is raining. You have, creepy things scrawled on the wall in a big mystery where at the end they're going to pull the rug out under you on their hero in some way, shape, or form. There's lots to talk about this time.
Yeah. I mean, and you still see the influence. You still see the influence today. Like From Dusk Till Dawn, I mean, Ryan Coogler credits that with inspiration for Sinners, which is Pete and I reviewed that. It's one of our favorite horror movies of the year. And like the second half of that movie is effectively From Dusk Till Dawn.
It wears it on its sleeve. I mean, to the point that it's vampire, and I love it. I love it because it's different, but it's the same premise, sort of, kind of. But that's fine. It's been a while, and I would call Sinners, despite its wearing many of its influences on its sleeve, it's a wholly original film. Cut from familiar cloth, if you think about it. And it deserves all the flowers it gets because it's such a great film. And my favorite, there are two moments where I wish I was a fly on the wall. One was for when Dusk Till Dawn first came out, and people who somehow missed, how it was sold, went to go see the new Tarantino and Clooney heist movie. And at the end, we're like, what the fuck is going on at the Titty Twister, and same thing, I saw Sinners opening day on that Friday that it opened, but I did not hear anyone when we were walking out saying, "This is a vampire movie." You didn't tell me that, honey. But I know there were plenty of people who just sort of came in oblivious, and how awesome is that? How awesome is that? That people can still be surprised and entertained and engrossed by just a great premise and solid filmmaking,
Yeah. You mentioned foreign horror. Pete and I love foreign horror on the channel. And obviously the easy direction would be to talk about J horror, but I am wearing a Della Morte Della More shirt, and I did see Cemetery Man in the trailer. So can you talk about including that movie? Because it's one of my all-time favorites. It's one of, like, whenever somebody goes, what's a great horror movie that I've never seen? It's one of, like, the first ones I'll reel off. And then they go, Rupert Everett's in this?
Yeah. Well, first off, I have to say that, I think Cemetery Man is a great shot-for-shot remake of Della Morte Della More. I mean, even better than Gus Van Sant's Psycho. It's just like, however they got everyone to look the same age in the same exact spot for the same. Okay, all right, it's the same movie, right? The thing is, I didn't realize that when Cemetery Man first came out. I used to see that in the video store, and I kind of discounted it. I was just like, okay, it's in the horror section, but I see Rupert Everett. Isn't he like a romantic lead? And he looks really just sad and forlorn standing in a cemetery. I didn't even bother to read the back. I'm just like, yeah, pass. And I never rented it, but it wasn't until it wasn't until several years later that, friends of mine or I'd read about this amazing Italian horror movie, Della Morte dell'Amore, amazing practical effects, sort of defies all the CG that was happening in the era. Maybe it's kind of the last great holdover from the 80s in terms of Italian horror, arguably. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This sounds like right up my alley. I got to check it out. And then I'm like, wait, like you said, Rupert Everett's in this? Wait a minute. Like, let me do the math here.
Right.
Oh.
You there, Dave? Oh,
I'm here.
It's glitching. Oh.
But anyway,
okay. Yeah, okay. I think we're good.
Anyway, I love it. I think that it's worthy. It's worthy of our time. Absolutely, and it's a movie that should be shared and people need to discover. And I will reveal to you that there is a segment about Della Morte dell'Amore. I always flip it. I always would say Dell'Amore Della Morte. Good thing you're wearing your shirt so I can have a cue card.
Thank you. Well, David, it's been close to 50 minutes. So as always, we could, in theory,
ask your last question.
Well, we always like to, and the reason you come on here, we want to give you a chance to sell your movie. So, give us where people can subscribe, where people can go to sign up to buy it, and when you expect it'll come out, and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. The way you sort of set that up, I felt it was a bit like Shark Tank. Like, do I have to pitch this to you? But, yeah, In Search of Darkness, 1995 to 1999 is currently available for pre-order, where you go to exclusively 90shorrordoc.com, 90s horrordoc, DOC. 90shorrordoc.com. Between now and June 9th at midnight, you can pre-order. And you get all the cool stuff that whenever you pre-order this, like your name in the credits, cool posters, two amazing artwork, two amazing posters. You get your Blu-ray, but there's a variety of things that you got to go to the site. That's much more exciting to read than to hear me talk about. But I will say that what's cool about it is if you missed In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994, you can get that as well. So you could buy that. You could also buy there it is. Now you could also get a slipcover, so you could buy both of them. The part 1 and part 2 of 90s, and it comes in this cool slipcover.
Oh, that's cool.
If it's like you guys, where you bought the first and now you plan to buy the second, arguably, but you're like, well, I don't need another version of the first. You could buy the slipcover by itself. And if you missed the In Search of Darkness 80s trilogy, you can get that. And there's also, if you have no more room on your awesome shelf, or you just moved and everything's in a box and you just don't want to, your wife says no more DVDs and Blu-rays because we need a room for the crib, you can get the digital bundle, or just, you can get it digitally. But here's the deal. You are helping us as an indie production complete this film. It will be completed regardless, but you help to get us over the line by pre-ordering now. And this movie will be coming out at the end of the year. As long as everything goes as according to plan, that's the intention. End of the year, you'll have a final chance in down the road.
Yeah.
Then, and you'll be holding it in your hands by pretty much you'll be watching it digitally by December, and you'll be holding it in your hands by probably January, maybe February. And so this is like a collector's item where you're doing all sorts of different things this time around to mix it up. So there's lots of things that you like, but it's like we don't want to do repeats. So, we'll have some different things that, again, I'm not going to bore you with the listicle of the cool stuff you can get and the different packages you can get. Go to 90shorrordoc.com. Super collectible, super cool, super physical in your hand, super supporting indie film.
And I'll add, they're
Nice.
they're super rewatchable. I watched, especially there was a period where the In Search of Darkness '80s, I believe, was on Shudder, and that would just be how I went to sleep every night. I would just put it on and like rewatch a year or two until I fell asleep. And also as a parent of a budding horror fan, these are phenomenal as teaching tools. As a guy who runs a horror club at school, these are great as teaching tools. So I always appreciate getting these physically. I will just throw out to you, David. My daughter wanted me to, and I use this word lightly. She wanted me to complain because in Search of Darkness 90 to 94, she said that she felt like you were teasing everybody with how you would pan in on a movie and then it would be the movie next to it. And she'd be like, "Oh, I love this movie." And then it would pan and she'd be like, "Wait, what movie is this?" And I'm like, "Don't worry about it. Just watch."
Tell your daughter we definitely did some intentional psych and did something else just to be playful with the audience. I think at the expense of your daughter's expectations and certain people being a little upset about that, I thought it was kind of fun. I've heard people say that it's fun, but I've also heard people say, "Oh, wow, why didn't you you should have gone to that movie." You know what? I'm always in a can't win scenario where someone wins, someone loses with every poster that we do go in and then do a segment on the movie. So you're saying that you use In Search of Darkness for a teaching tool, like you actually show
I
some of it, or
Yeah, I run a horror movie club at my school, and I've used whenever we only stay for like an hour after school. So sometimes if I don't have enough time to show a whole movie, I'll bring in one of the DVDs or one of the Blu-rays, and I'll put it in my computer and I'll show them an hour, and I'll have to like selectively edit in case of nudity and selectively edit in case of like the violence isn't a problem. But yeah, I've definitely like whenever I talk about like here's a list of movies you should go see with your parents' permission, uh, the kids seem to love it, and I've had a bunch of kids who've come back to me and like told me like, "Oh my god, I watched this movie. I can't believe how great it was." And so yeah, no, it's awesome.
that's wonderful to hear. That makes me very happy. You also mentioned on that you watch this on Shutter, and you kind of lulls you to sleep. I read Letterboxd, and I see. Well, I'm not afraid of it because a lot of people, there people are very candid on Letterboxd, and if they don't like it, they'll say it. If they like it, they'll say it. And a lot of people collectively say this is a movie on repeat viewing that it's like this comfort blanket to watch in the background or to go to sleep to. I used to, when the first couple times I said to go to sleep to, I'm like, really? Okay. Well, at least my documentary is good for something. But I've come to realize that this is really something that means something to people in all sorts of different ways. And it makes me overjoyed. I also want to add that you go to Shudder, and you'll notice that In Search of Darkness 1, In Search of Darkness 2, no longer there. In Search of Darkness 3 is there. That won't be there for too much longer. I don't know when it's going to go, but these things cycle out based on licenses. So one last plug is like if you want to keep these and have them lullaby you to sleep every night, you got to get the physical copies from us, because otherwise, or you can get the digital downloads from us. Sure. But they're going to be hard. They're going to be hard to track down. These are exclusive. They're limited run, and they're hard to find, and they're not always going to be on Amazon or Shudder. And it's good to have a copy of your own if you value repeat viewing.
Yep. All right. Well, David, as always, we appreciate you coming on, and we look forward to you coming back maybe later this year when there's that one last plug for the documentary, which you said should be coming out by December.
Yeah. I'll be plugging it again in October, for the final push before that's it. Like if you wanted your name in the credits, if you wanted an opportunity to be potentially in the end credits, we'll do that again. What we do in the end credits, I'm sure I know you guys have been in it, but
there's a certain handsome man at the end of this movie.
He looks like Dr. Zaius to me, but in the end credits, what we do is we sorry, I'm tickled by my own joke. During the end credits, we have people talk about how much they love the era, how much these movies mean to them. And I can't fit everybody, but we try and get as many people as possible. And I think it adds a real connective community, human touch to everything that led before it, to show the people who are in contemporary times really touched by all these movies from this era. So, that's another opportunity for you to do this before the movie is done. And that's that. You could watch it. You get to be part of horror history now if you pre-order.
All right. I, as somebody who made the cut last time, I highly recommend that.
Go for it, Pete. Go for it, Pete. We're listening. Yes. It's just a differential.
No, I was going to say, hopefully about 75% of this recording didn't freeze up, and we can all look forward to getting In Search of Darkness 1995 through 1999, where you can lull us to sleep by teasing us with your listicles. So we'll see you guys. And